Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Buddy, hi, I'm Susan Kaufman. I'm here for Attitude's weekly ADHD Experts broadcast. Today, we'll be talking with Brendan Mahan about grit, resilience, and about how to help our children overcome repeated failures. I want to welcome all of our listeners, those of you who are listening live right now, or those of you who may be listening later in the months to come to this webinar and replay. Let me just point out that in order to receive a certificate of attendance, you must stay through the end of the webinar and complete a brief quiz. For the replay listeners, just be sure you're listening to this webinar not on attitudemag.com, but on the original host. Go to webcast. You'll see instructions for that on the page on attitudemag.com. Our topic today is a really important one. Our kids often struggle and fail more than their peers. Repeated challenges, starting and finishing tasks, from chores to homework and everything in between, lead to just guilt and shame and anxiety. As parents, we often really struggle to understand this and to talk about it helpfully. It's a part of attention deficit disorder that's very difficult emotionally. So Brendan Mahan will be talking today about a way to talk with your children and help them overcome shame and disappointments and anxiety that are associated with life with ADHD. Let me introduce Brendan to you today, and we're really pleased to have him here join us today. He is the producer and the host of the ADHD Essentials podcast, which is an internationally recognized ADHD and executive function. He is an internationally recognized ADHD and executive function expert and a very engaging, I think you'll find, and sought after speaker. He helps both individuals, families, schools, and businesses through all the challenges of attention deficit disorder, with a special, focus on compassion and humor and strengths. You can contact him if you'd like to, Brendan at ADHDessentials.com. Thank you so much, Brendan, for being here. We are grateful.
Thank you for having me.
I would also like to thank the sponsor of today's webinar, to whom we are also very grateful, and that is Play Attention. Play Attention is the leading neurocognitive training program. It's designed to strengthen executive functions and self-regulation. It is a very comprehensive system, which includes a NASA-inspired technology, cognitive training, behavior shaping, parent coaching, and a lot more. So they offer a wonderful free professional consultation. You can call their 800 number. It's 1-800-788-6786, or click playattention.com/index.php professional consultation to schedule a pre-professional consultation and ADHD assessment. So that's playattention.com. Thank you so much to both Brendan and Play Attention. We are going to have a brief quiz now to ask you about the ages of your children, just so Brendan and all of us have an idea of who our listeners are and what ages of children they are parenting. And while you complete that quiz, let me just tell you a little bit about how the webinar works in case you're new to our webinars. You'll be entering your questions in the Ask a Question section of the screen. You can do that at any time when they occur to you later while Brendan's speaking. You can download the slides now by clicking Download the Webinar Slides in the Event Resource section. And to learn more about the sponsor or about Brendan, click those tabs that say sponsor or an expert speaker above the slides. If you have audio issues, they are almost always caused by slow webinar speed. And if you're on Wi-Fi, that's going to be a problem. So try to use a wired connection and close any other programs that you might be outstanding. So let's see how our preview is doing here. Are we done with this preview? Yes, we are. Okay. Looks like 44% of you have a 5 to 10-year-old. 36% have a 11 to 13-year-old, and then we have a section of teens. So nice, and some over 18s. So a nice range of kids, Brendan, for you to address.
Yeah.
And with that, let turn it over to Brendan.
Sure. Thank you very much, both for having me and for that wonderful introduction. I appreciate it. So we are here to talk about a model that I've developed called the Wall of Awful. And the Wall of Awful is the emotional barrier that grows out of repeated failure and prevents us from taking risks and initiating tasks. People with ADHD just fail more often than folks who don't have ADHD. And I know that because I have ADHD and my wife doesn't. And I know that I have struggled a lot more than she has. And as I learned more about ADHD, became more of an expert in the disorder, and started to hear about things like executive function and the role dopamine plays for us, it became a lot more clear to me why I was struggling so much. And soon I started working with folks as an ADHD coach, as a consultant, both in schools and individually. And I started to see this pattern that began with kids struggling to do their homework and sort of grew from there. And I started to realize that when kids wanted to do their homework, there was sort of this wall of awful, just negative emotions that kept them from initiating that task. And so that's what I called it. I just called it the wall of awful. It's the emotional barrier, again, that grows out of repeated failure and prevents us from taking risks and initiating tasks, whether the risk is talking to someone who might be a new friend or the task is doing homework. The wall of awful is also a model that helps make this abstract concept of negative emotional associations more concrete. It just makes it easier to understand what that is and how to work with it, and also makes it easier to talk about. So when we fail, when those of us with ADHD fail over and over and over again, it's often in the same areas. So a wall of awful might grow up for math or writing or cleaning your room or doing your homework. The things that we're good at, we don't typically develop walls of awful around because we just don't fail at them as much. And one thing that's important to know is that everyone has a wall of awful. Whether or not you have ADHD, you've still got a wall of awful for something. People with ADHD just tend to have more of them, and they tend to be bigger. So the effects of this repeated failure are pretty significant. We might draw negative conclusions about our skills, our abilities, even our value as a person. And generally, these negative associations, these negative conclusions are inaccurate. It's not the case that I'm a bad person because I forgot my wife's birthday. That doesn't mean I don't love her. I tell her I love her every day. It just means that I'm bad at dates. It means I have ADHD. This repeated failure can also cause us to lose our motivation and our optimism, or at least it can severely damage our motivation and optimism. We can feel powerless. We can feel worthless. We can feel trapped and stuck in our situation, not sure how to change it or how to improve things. And it can trigger all kinds of negative associations, like I mentioned, whether they're conscious or unconscious. Stresses and fears and those things can lead to self-sabotage. That's the kid who is upset, knows that reading a book helps him calm down. Mom or a teacher or some adult brings a book over to him and he just throws it across the room. Even though he knows that's a successful strategy, he's self-sabotaging because of his own negative associations with how he's feeling in the moment, not with that book and not necessarily with reading. But failure happens to everybody, regardless of whether they have ADHD or not. And the way we respond to that failure has a huge impact on how much of an emotional struggle we have with it. If we fail and we respond by deciding that our goals are out of reach, or becoming demoralized and frozen and helpless, or getting emotionally overwhelmed and stressed out and self-conscious, then we're putting bricks in our wall. Or if our kid is doing that, then our child is putting bricks in their wall. If we respond to our child's failure in a way that implies that their goals are out of reach, or causes them to feel guilt and shame around that failure, we're putting bricks in their wall. And those are bricks that don't need to be there. We're all going to fail. We're all going to put bricks in our wall. The bricks are going to come. We don't need to add more by talking about how much of a loser I am or telling my kid that they're never going to amount to anything. that's not necessary. Those bricks that come from harsh, unnecessary judgment. So we want to try to avoid that. Another option, though, is to just respond to failure with effort. It's okay to keep trying. It's okay to look at this failure and say, you know what? Maybe I didn't do that the right way. Let me try a new strategy. It's also okay to give up, as long as you're giving up not out of frustration, but out of a calculated decision. Like, this just isn't worth the effort that I'm putting into it. Then okay, maybe give up on that. But if the thing that's really at the core of this failure is your own self-worth and your own value as a person, you are worth the effort. Learning Spanish might not be worth the effort, but you are worth the effort. So continue to put that effort in for yourself and your own self-improvement. And your kid is worth the effort. So continue to put the effort in for their self-worth, their self-improvement. So again, the wall of awful is built by repeated failure. Every time we fail, we get a brick in our wall, a little failure brick. And along with that failure brick comes a disappointment brick, because we've disappointed ourselves. But we also get a disappointment brick for everyone whose opinion matters around that failure. So if I'm a 12-year-old girl in middle school and I failed to do my math homework, something that small, I get my failure brick. And I also get a disappointment brick for myself. And I get one for my mom, my dad, my teacher, maybe a classmate, if that's the kind of homework that we're doing. So those other bricks land too. And that disappointment brick, it's not about whether they're actually disappointed in us. It's about how we perceive it. Do we think they're going to be disappointed in us? If we believe that, then the brick lands. Unless they get in really quick. If the teacher says, hey, don't worry about it, you haven't missed a homework assignment in the past 2 months, it's not a big deal, just give it to me tomorrow, right away, we're good. If we find that out quick, we're great. Especially if you're the kid who kind of goes to math class and everyone's taking out the homework and you're like, what do you mean we had homework? Then the teacher can get in quick. But if you are the kid who realizes in the morning that they didn't do their homework, that brick is probably going to stay because you're not even going to see the math teacher until later. Or if you intentionally didn't do it the night before, that's a kind of a different animal even. And along with these disappointment bricks, we also get rejection bricks. Because when we disappoint someone, we feel like they're going to reject us. And again, it doesn't matter if they actually reject us or if they don't reject us. What matters is our perception and our expectation. So if I don't do the dishes because I've been busy for the whole day and I haven't stopped and sat down since 8:30 in the morning, and my wife comes home from work and I know she's going to see the dishes in the sink, I might be awash with guilt and shame about the fact that I didn't do the dishes and my expectation that my wife was going to be upset with me. But that doesn't mean that she's actually going to be upset with me. She may very well be fine with it because she can see my calendar and she knows how busy I was that day. But because I'm not thinking it all the way through and I'm not realizing that, I might get that rejection brick, particularly if she doesn't communicate to me that it's not a big deal. Does this mean we shouldn't have expectations for our kids? No, we should absolutely have expectations for our kids. And they should be relatively high, but they should also be things that they can achieve. So along with these failure, disappointment, and rejection bricks, we get other bricks, some of which I've already named. Guilt, little brick of guilt. Shame is a huge block, and it adds a lot of significance and size to our wall. The difference between guilt and shame is guilt is I feel like I made a mistake. Shame is I feel like I am the mistake. And one of the tricky things with ADHD is if I made the mistake because I have ADHD, how do I tease that out? How do I make it feel like I made the mistake as opposed to making it feel like I am the mistake because I'm the one with ADHD, so of course I'm terrible? If that's where you are, a strategy I like to use is I just say sometimes the ADHD wins, because sometimes it does. And that means that I get to pick the battle anew. That means that I get to depersonalize the aspect of ADHD that's biting me at the moment. Now, the ADHD did that. I didn't do that. And I'm not using that as an excuse, but I am accepting that that's a reason. And I'm giving myself permission to have ADHD. I also happen to have asthma. And there are times when I struggle to breathe. But I don't beat myself up about that. I don't say, why am I too lazy and unmotivated to breathe? What's wrong with me? No, I have asthma. I'm supposed to not be able to breathe sometimes. And I also have ADHD. And sometimes I forget things. And sometimes I have trouble starting things. And that's okay. If I didn't have those challenges, I wouldn't have ADHD. So that permission is pretty powerful as a means to manage your wall of awful and help your kid manage theirs. There are 5 strategies that people use to get past their walls of awful. Because I don't want to just leave you here with this big wall. Let's talk about getting past it. There's 5 strategies. 2 of those strategies don't work at all. The first one is staring at the wall. You're there. You know there's this task you have to do. You're just not doing it. Yep, that's a really big wall. Oh well, you're not engaging. Another strategy that gets used that also doesn't work is going around the wall, right? Like, oh yeah, I'll totally mow the lawn, but first I want to watch an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants to get me ready. 1 episode becomes 2, becomes 3. I just spent the last 4 hours watching SpongeBob and I haven't mowed the lawn. Really what I'm doing is avoiding the task. I'm avoiding those negative emotions. And a strategy that works, but is damaging, so it's not a good plan, but it's one that we use all the time, is to smash through the wall. That's when we go back to that girl with the math homework and we're like, hey, don't forget to do your math homework. And she's like, I don't want to. Yeah, but you need to do it. So come on, we want to get it done by 6 o'clock because you have cheerleading or whatever. And eventually, after we've sort of asked her a few times, she snaps. Fine, I'll do my math. God, lay off. And then she's doing the homework. That's Hulk smashing. That's her using anger to activate, to get that dopamine flow rolling, right? And she's attacking you. Or she might Hulk smash inwardly. What's wrong with me? Why do I suck? Why can't I just do this? You know, the hood gets flipped up and off she goes. Neither of those are healthy. If we Hulk smash outwardly, we're damaging our relationship with mom, with dad, with our teacher, with our brother, our sister, our friend, whoever, our boss, if you're an adult. If we Hulk smash inwardly, we're damaging our relationship with ourselves, our self-esteem. So in both cases, we want to try to avoid that if we can. And by the way, working backwards, right? Hulk smashing through the wall, that's really the fight response in our fight, flight, and freeze stress response. Trying to go around it is flight, just avoiding the situation. And if we stare at the wall, we're frozen. That's the freeze response. And everyone tends to be affected by one of those more strongly than the other, but we certainly can all have any of those responses. It's important to know that if that's where we are, we're that much closer to the amygdala, to the part of the brain that just wants to keep us safe and tends to have trouble with and cause us to get overwhelmed by really strong emotions. The 2 strategies that work are much more in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that is responsible for careful decision-making and logic and problem-solving and those sorts of things. The first strategy I want to talk about with regard to that is climbing the wall. Climbing the wall is a long-term strategy. It's not necessarily going to instantly help us change our emotional state so that we can get to the other side. It requires some work. It also requires us to be aware of and accept our struggles. And there's a few ways we can become stronger climbers. We can make our kids stronger climbers. One is to reframe failure. I have a professor that I got with my second master's degree, and he liked to talk about how he didn't believe he could fail anymore because even when he messed up, even when things didn't work out, he always learned something from it. So even when it looked like he was failing, he was really succeeding. And that's a great perception to have. It's not an easy one to execute on, but it's a really great perspective. Did you learn anything from this failure? And can we use that moving forward? Another way to help our kids become stronger climbers is just teach them to be uncomfortable. They have to learn how to sit with it and do the hard thing even when they don't want to. Sometimes that means studying math facts or writing an essay. And sometimes that means that we help them engage in activities that are hard to do, right? Maybe we're going to go camping and then we find out that there's going to be a downpour and we go camping anyway because that's going to be uncomfortable and our kids are going to have to learn how to navigate that. So we may as well make them uncomfortable in the rain where it's a little more controlled and we're going to be there. And the outcome isn't an F on an essay because they didn't do it. It's just soggy shoes. Or maybe we sign them up for sports and we're clear with them that, yes, while I would like for you to learn how to dribble a basketball, the main reason I want you to play this sport is so that you learn how to struggle. I want you to be able to fall down and get back up again. I want you to know what it's like to lose a game and come back the next one and still try, or how to get boxed out and continue trying to push for that rebound. That's one of the values of sports, is that it teaches us how to be uncomfortable and how to do the hard thing anyway. It teaches that mental toughness. We can also hold ourselves and our kids responsible for fixing a problem without casting blame. So if they break a window, yeah, okay, they made a mistake. They probably feel terrible about it. But now they're going to be responsible for fixing that window. And that might mean that you and your kid go out and buy a new window and they're part of the replacement process and they help you with that, even if mostly what they're doing is watching and learning. Or it might mean that they have to work it off or pay for some of it out of their allowance or whatever the case may be. However you decide to hold them responsible, it's important to teach our kids that responsibility for solving a problem. It doesn't matter who caused the problem a lot of the times. It just matters who's going to solve it. And teaching our kids to be problem solvers, even if they're the ones who caused them, is really powerful. It's really important. We can't just let them duck that responsibility. My Uncle Ben, actually it was Spider-Man's Uncle Ben, but I like to pretend it was my Uncle Ben. My Uncle Ben used to say that with great power comes great responsibility. And I like to flip that on its head and say with great responsibility comes great power, because when we take responsibility for things, we're empowering ourselves. And if we can teach our kids to take responsibility for stuff, they will become empowered as well. And of course, you guys wouldn't think I knew what I was doing if I didn't mention mindfulness as a way to become a stronger climber. Mindfulness helps us regulate our emotions more effectively. It helps us sit with those uncomfortable emotions, sit with the hard thing a little longer. It's just a really powerful tool for becoming a stronger climber. And it's also a webinar all on its own. So I'm going to leave that there. Another plan is not only can our kids become stronger climbers, we can also make the climb easier for them. One way to do that is to just learn ADHD-friendly strategies, which, if you're listening to me talk right now, that's something you're already doing. So you know how to break things down into small, manageable chunks. You know about the importance of sticky notes and those kinds of things. Use those ADHD-friendly strategies. And one specific one that I want to encourage you to look at is helping your kids develop time wisdom. Those of us with ADHD, we often conflate time and effort, or time and emotional weight. So mowing my yard is something that feels like a lot of effort to me. So in my head, it's an all-day process. And I knew that wasn't right. So I timed myself. I developed some time wisdom around how long it takes me to mow my lawn. Turns out 45 minutes to an hour to mow my front yard, and about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes to mow my backyard. And that means it's not an all-day process. It's like a 2-hour job, maybe 2.5. That's not nearly as bad as the 4 or 5 hours it was in my head, because I was conflating the effort of it and how much I didn't like to do it with how long it actually took. And me knowing how long it really takes makes it easier for me to start doing it. Because if I have an hour, I know I can mow the front yard, as opposed to in the past where I'd be like, I only have an hour, I can't get the yard mowed. That wasn't true. Knowing how long it takes to do things like brush your teeth, clean your room, read a page in a book, those kinds of things, it helps us start. If your kid can't stand reading, oh, I have to read like 10 pages. It's going to take forever. And you know, and they know that it takes them about a minute to read a page, which is typically how that stuff goes. That's a 10-minute experience. They can do that, especially if they have 15 or 20 minutes. So just letting them develop that time wisdom is powerful. And a lot of the time, this looks like timing how long it takes to do something more than once, time it 3, 4, 5 times, and then take the average, and that's about how long it takes. Tally ho. Also, we want to plan things in advance as much as we can. That's another way to make a climb easier. Set clear goals. Make sure they're attainable. If your kid has never gotten an A in math, don't make that a goal. They're not going to get the A in math. If they typically get B minuses, maybe you set the goal as a B. And that's the stretch. We don't want to push them beyond their abilities. And also only set a few goals. 1, 2, maybe 3. If we start setting more than that, things become unmanageable. And if going back to that grade thing, if you're like all A's and B's, that's actually like 6 goals, right? Because each individual class is a goal. So let's look at the ones we need to really sweat and focus in on those. You want to get these grades in these classes. Another thing that's important when we're planning in advance is defining done. Are you done when you finish writing the essay, or are you done after you've spent 20 minutes writing the essay? Or are you done when you finish the outline for the essay, and we don't even expect you to start writing the real essay until tomorrow? If they're cleaning the room, is done the whole room is clean? If so, what does that look like? Take pictures of the room, clean it to your specifications, take pictures. Now they have a map. Make it look like the picture. Done has been defined. Or maybe they don't have to clean the whole room. Maybe they just have to clear the floor off or their desk. Help them understand when they're going to be finished, because one of the challenges for ADHD is if we don't know when we're done, it's hard for us to start because it feels like we'll never finish. Another way to make a climb easier is to take some time to transition. We ADHD people struggle with transitions. It's hard for us to go from one thing to the next. So let your kid take a little bit of time to transition from home to homework, or from home to walking the dog and then to homework. Give them a little bit of space in there. Going from school to walking the dog and then to homework, those are different emotional states. Those are different kinds of brain function. We want to help our kid activate by giving them that time to transition. If we just expect them to go from walking the dog and then jump right into homework, that's a recipe for them smashing through the wall. Because climbing the wall is transition. It's a period of transition. I'm sure you've all seen the phenomenon where your kid takes 20 minutes to get their binders out of their backpack. And you're like, what is taking so long? So you go over, you grab the binder out of their backpack, you drop it down on the table, you flip it open, and you're like, there, do it. And then all of a sudden, they're yelling at you, why, get out of my backpack, what are you doing? Or they're flipping their hood up and sulking, something like that. Because they were not getting their binders out of their backpack. They were climbing their wall of awful. They were transitioning to homework. They were sitting with the dread that they have for whatever that homework assignment is. And they were going up the wall, and then all of a sudden, you said, transition right now, get over the wall right now, get to the other side immediately. And they had one strategy available to them, Hulk smash. So they did. Another strategy here to make our climbs easier is just to reflect on how things went. We do not want to do this in the moment when and if emotions are heated. We want to do this later. But how did it go? What went well with that essay? What went poorly with that essay? What went well for the test? What went poorly for the test? What do we have to learn from this experience? You can reflect on that for your kids. You can reflect on that for yourselves. You can have your kids reflect on it. In fact, I highly recommend having your kids reflect on it. And you can even have your kids reflect on how you did. Hey, I noticed that sometimes you get aggravated with me when I ask you to do your homework. What am I doing wrong? Another strategy that works, putting a door in the wall. This is a short-term strategy. It requires changing your emotional state. In a lot of ways, smashing through the wall is similar to putting a door in the wall. Except smashing a hole in the wall is damaging, and putting a door in it is okay. We can open it, we can close it. It's a much safer alternative. It maintains the integrity. So how do we put a door in the wall? How do we help our kids change their emotional state? First off, satisfy the biological needs. Let them pee. Let them have a snack. If they're exhausted, let them take a nap if they have to. Satisfy those biological needs, because without them being satisfied, it's going to be harder to get started. And this is both in the moment and in the bigger picture. Make sure they're getting enough sleep. Make sure they're eating healthy foods. Make sure they're exercising. Another way to change your kid's emotional state is to use music. Lots of our kids want to listen to music. Let them, as long as it's not distracting. And even if it is, that might be okay. They might need to take a break for a minute. So if they're working for 20 minutes and then all of a sudden they're singing a song, it's probably okay. They probably just needed a brain break and they're taking it. Provide planned breaks. With a lot of my clients, they'll say, oh, I'm going to work for like 20 minutes and I'm going to take a 5-minute break and then I'm going to work for 20 minutes more. And I'm like, okay, what does that 5-minute break look like? Well, what do you mean? Well, first of all, is it really going to be 5 minutes? No, my breaks are usually more like 20 minutes. Oh, that matters, right? You said 5, but you know they're 20. Set a timer. Know what you're going to do. The kids' break should not look like what they're doing. So if they're typing an essay on a computer and then they go and hang out on Instagram for 5 minutes, which how many people can hang on Instagram for 5 minutes, but we'll pretend. And then they come back to the essay. That isn't really a difference. That's the same thing. You're still staring at a computer screen. They should work on the essay and then go for a walk or go up to the kitchen and grab some carrot sticks or something for a snack. Or cookies. It's cookies, right? It's probably cookies. We want to make sure that the break is different from the task and have some structure. You're going to do this, then go back to homework. Also encourage them to exercise. If you're having trouble starting, take a walk. Kid, go jump on the trampoline. Do something that involves exercise. Ride your bike for a few minutes. That helps get the brain activated, which makes it easier to get past the wall. Let them fidget as much as they need to. Fidget spinners, those little clicky fidgets, whatever they need to help them get started, including gum. At least at home, gum is a great fidget, particularly mint gum. And let them work with other people. If they need you to be there to hang out with them for a little while, great. If they can work with their sister or their friend, do that. Working with other people makes us feel accountable, helps us activate. And finally, they can change location. There's a reason so many people write in coffee shops. That change of location, that implied accountability from strangers around us helps us get started. Do you want your kid to do homework in a coffee shop? Probably not. But maybe they stay after school and go to the library, or maybe they go to the public library, or maybe they work in the kitchen for a little while and then they move to the living room, or they go outside if the weather's nice. It's okay to change locations. Boys in particular seem to need this strategy. Just that little bit of extra movement can be powerful. So when it comes to talking to our kids about the emotional impact of failure, the wall of awful can be a powerful tool because we can use it to make this abstract concept of the emotional impact of failure more concrete. Pardon me. Just share this idea with your kids. And then when they're struggling, when they can't seem to start, you can say, hey, are you climbing the wall of awful? Instead of, do you need help with your homework? How come you haven't started it? Do you have homework? What's going on with homework? Hey, are you climbing the wall of awful? You may very well get the answer of, yeah, I am. All right, well, how can I help? How can I help you climb it? What do you need? Can I help you put a door in it? Every now and then you luck out and the kid says, no, I'm not climbing my wall of awful. I'm just stuck, or I'm just spacey. Great. You're the inattentive kid. Awesome. Tune in. Do your work. This model can help us limit guilt and shame in our kids because we're encouraging growth mindsets. Those are better than fixed mindsets. Did we learn something from the failure? Did we really fail? Are we getting closer to our goal even if we didn't reach it? Those kinds of things. Encouraging responsibility and ownership is much better than blame and fault, as I mentioned earlier. Work with them to help solve the problem, forgive them, and move on. And really, you want to do that in the opposite order. You want to forgive them first to help manage the emotional weight of that mistake, and then help them solve the mistake so they feel like they've got some support and they're not all alone, and then move on. It's okay. If the problem repeats itself, then we'll have a conversation about that too and come up with some new strategies. Also, remember that all behavior is communication, all of it. If your kid melts down right before math homework or right before writing, that's a communication tool. It might not be one we love, but it's still a piece of communication. What's being communicated? Is it that they hate math, or is it that they feel like they're not supported? Did they used to be great at math and now they're struggling and that's frustrating for them? What does that mean? Some of this is we have to reflect on it and think about it a little bit. And some of it we can ask. Hey, you get upset before we do math all the time. What's going on? If you're going to have that question, ask it when they're not doing math, outside of that heightened emotional event and behavior. Do it later. Do it when you're out getting pizza at Bertucci's or something. And also, forgive the behavior first, like I said, then solve the problem, unless the problem is chronic. If it's a chronic behavior, that's different. Then we want to solve the chronic behavior. But forgiveness is really important here, because that's what helps our kids feel connected to us. Also, kids are going to get bricks in their walls. Let's just not add too many that are not necessary. That means we help them and support them as necessary. We don't throw blame around if we can avoid it, but we do point out problems when they arise. It's not that you're too lazy to do your math homework. It's not that you can't handle math. It's that you're struggling. When our kids are driving us the craziest, when we are having the most trouble, they are having more trouble. It is harder for them. And if we can take that approach, then we can bring more compassion to the situation. No matter how hard it is on us, it's harder on them. So hopefully that helps us be patient. And also, give your kids permission to have ADHD. Forgive them when the ADHD wins. And then move on. And help them win more than the ADHD does with those strategies and tactics that we talked about earlier. In closing, everyone is affected by a wall of awful, often more than one. If I have a wall of awful for homework and I have a wall of awful for math, I have to get past both of those to start my math homework. And if I have a wall of awful for doing homework when my little sister is around, I might be fine doing my homework, and then my little sister wanders into the kitchen and now I can't do my homework anymore because there's a new wall of awful. So be aware of that as well. But our kids can overcome these walls. They can navigate them. And we can help them become stronger climbers. We can help them put doors in their walls. And by recognizing and honoring when our kids face their personal walls of awful, that will help us support them in overcoming those same walls. Thank you very much. And I will happily take questions.
Thanks so much, Brendan. That was really very inspirational. I think I can speak for a number of people who have posted to that effect. Lots of great questions. Let me see. Well, here's one that, that we do see frequently at Attitude, and I wonder what what your thought about this is. How do we teach our children to give themselves permission to make mistakes, but avoid using their ADHD as an excuse?
Let them use their ADHD as an excuse at first, because that's practice, right? They're sort of practicing with this permission excuse thing and what's permission and what's an excuse and those kinds of things. At first, even when they're using it as an excuse, that doesn't mean they don't have to do the thing. They still have to solve the problem, right? So if they're using it as an excuse and that is helping them avoid guilt and shame, great. But the excuse ends when the problem solving starts. That's really what permission is. That's kind of the difference between permission and excuse. Excuse is, I have ADHD, I caused a problem, I don't even have to solve it. And permission is, I have ADHD, that's why I caused this problem, but I still have to fix it. Like, I still have to remedy this problem. So that's where I would draw the line. And at first, I would be more gentle. I see the excuse coming and I'm like, yeah, you're right. It's because you have ADHD, but what do you think about the fact that there's still this problem that exists and what should we do with it? And if they say, well, maybe you can solve the thing, maybe you can solve that problem, mom or dad, it might be because they're too emotionally upset to face the problem. And it's okay to protect them from that a little at first. But as they get older, as they get deeper into the diagnosis, a month, 2 months later, we want to start saying, okay, but I feel like you should help me solve this problem. So what can we do together? Let's solve it together. And then eventually we scaffold them up to, this is the problem that happened. Yes, it's because you have ADHD, but you got to figure it out. You got to solve it. And that's going to vary with kids' age and how long they've been navigating the diagnosis. But that's sort of the progression.
That's a great distinction between permission and excuse. I think that's really a helpful idea. There's a couple of questions here that I find really intriguing because they're about time. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but in the context of this fear of failure, one person says, my child freaks out when I set a timer. Even for a small task, when he sees a timer, he just gives up. And then another person says, these are questions that came in one right after another. When I ask my grandson to do something, he always asks first, how long is it going to take? What should I say? So what's going on here with this what seems to be fear about time and deadlines? Right?
Yeah, potentially there's two different things happening there, maybe, but they're both connected. In both cases, we've got time creating anxiety, right? The first kid is being overwhelmed by that anxiety and shutting down. The second kid either is getting ready to be overwhelmed by that anxiety or, because I only have so much information, or that second kid, that grandson, might be looking to use the anxiety from time as a way to activate and initiate. Because folks with ADHD are often powered by anxiety, right? Like, something I like to say is that anxiety is the only thing we can burn for fuel and wind up with more of it when we're done. Because that's how ADHD people roll. A lot of the times we're really using anxiety to get ourselves motivated. So the grandson could be doing either of those. The kid who gets overwhelmed by a timer, one option is to just not use timers anymore and come up with a different strategy that may or may not be useful. You might want to use a different timer, maybe a digital timer with the time counting down is overwhelming, but like a sand dial, like straight out of the Wizard of Oz, maybe that is okay. Maybe an hourglass works. Or maybe a time timer where that sort of red disc disappears slowly but surely. Maybe that works. Maybe some of it is just the visual nature of it. Or maybe it's time pressure. And that might mean that you set the timer differently. Maybe it's going up instead of down and you're saying, I just want to see how long it takes you. It doesn't matter how long. I just want to see how long. So let's time up. Or maybe you need to expose the kid to being timed in a place that doesn't feel as risky and hard. And that gets them more comfortable with it. Or you distract them. Like, we have to do math problems and see how many you can do in 5 minutes. But you don't have to write stuff down necessarily. We'll do flashcards while you walk on a treadmill. And then there's enough other things going on that they're able to manage it. I know that worked with my kid. So there's a few different ways to crack that nut. Fascinating. I mean, on the topic of time management,
question is how to best solve a chronic behavior such as lateness in time management. So clearly time management and lateness seem to be related as you're describing it to anxiety in some way.
Yeah.
What is a good parental strategy for chronic lateness and time management problems?
First off, let's not conflate the two because they're not necessarily the same.
Okay.
I might be late because I don't want to do the thing I'm going to do. Like church might be really boring and I might consistently be late to church because then I don't have to be bored as long. Or I might not actually want to go to my friend's house because we had an argument and I don't actually like that friend, but mom thinks I do and isn't hearing me when I tell her that I don't like that kid. So now I'm dragging my feet on the way there, not because I have poor time awareness, but because I kind of want to avoid the situation. And I can't totally avoid it, but I can at least reduce the amount of time that I have to spend in that situation. Mm-hmm. Another strategy is you might not, or another element might be that maybe you're not allowing enough time to transition. And that is not necessarily the kid's time awareness. That's more the adult time awareness. If your kid consistently takes 20 minutes to leave the house and you consistently only give them 15 minutes to leave the house, that's on you, right? So maybe you expand how much time it takes or how much time is available to get out of the house. And then in terms of time awareness, setting a timer, finding out how long it really takes to do stuff is a huge tool in that arsenal that I've already talked about. Also, use your calendar. And depending on the age of the kid, they should be using calendars too. It's a lot easier for kids to start using calendars once they get to college because in sort of high school on down, their time is really controlled by the school and when classes happen and you're just there from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. or whatever. But as they get older and they reach college age, or if they're homeschooled, they have more control over when they're doing what. And calendaring is a powerful tool for that, particularly things like Google Calendar, online calendars. Those are much better for ADHD folks than a paper calendar is because there's less upkeep. They can just plug in every Monday at 3 o'clock, I study for statistics. And then 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock, that repeats, or 3 to 3:30 or whatever it may be. That repeats forever. And you just end it when statistics is done. And the other advantage to those online calendars is they fill in the full hour or the full half hour or the full 3 hours, and it makes time more visible. It makes it feel a little more concrete. So I can't recommend those tools enough.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Absolutely. Just switching topics to a minute to fear of participating, I guess. My son's terrifying of going back to school or any new social situation. He's been kicked out of day camps and activities repeatedly because of his behavior, and now he's frightened to try anything. That's a complicated one. I wonder what you have to offer to that parent.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. Certainly your son is scared, like you said, terrified of trying something new or going to a new school or new camp. Also, I suspect your kid probably doesn't trust adults or wonders about whether adults are on his side or not. And so one strategy to take is to find a program where you've got adults that are willing to become his ally and partner with him. My own kid struggled in summer camp this past summer because he's transitioning to middle school, is very anxious about that. And one of the summer camps he went to was at the middle school, and his behavior was not that great, and he got in trouble and got sent home one day. And so that was really challenging and a lighter version of what's being described in this question, but still there. But then the next summer camp he went to was at a dojo that we all go to. And my sensei is a friend. I've been with him for almost a decade now, and he took care of my kid. And he allied with my kid. And even though my son got upset and flipped a jug of water over during a squirt gun battle, he didn't get kicked out of camp. He didn't get sent home. He just had to sit down for a little while, calm down, and eat some Skittles, and then went back into the program and continued with his day, came back the next day, and everything was fine. And that helped my kid feel better about camp in general, and especially the dojo camp, because he was forgiven, because he was given permission to struggle. And that, I think, is a piece of what your son needs too, is he needs permission to struggle, and he needs to be forgiven for the misbehaviors that he's had, and feel like he has another chance.
So finding the right environment and the right people to be leaders for a child seems really critical in these situations like this. Yeah.
And also not pretending that the stuff didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Don't go to a camp and pretend that there's no issues. Go to the camp, meet adults in advance. As the parent without the kid, have a conversation with the adult leaders about what's up with your kid. Then, best case scenario, and this is not easy, it's pretty hard, but then you bring your kid to the camp leaders and have a conversation about what the struggles were before, and empower your kid. And this is something you have to prep the camp leaders for, or school leaders for, in advance. Have your kid say to them, this is what I did. This is how the adults responded. And this is why that didn't work. And this is how I would like it to happen here. Mm-hmm. Have the kid help solve the problem, because they know what they need better than you do, and better than the teachers and camp counselors and stuff do. It doesn't mean that what they want is going to be able to be done, but at least they can be heard, and there can be some negotiation around it and some validation.
Yeah, really important, I think, not to pretend this didn't happen, but to go ahead and confront it and move on, as you said. From there.
Shame dies in the light.
Right. Yeah, well, okay. Another child avoiding participation here. My son's very active and a very physical kid, but he avoids team sports because of the competition. He refuses to participate in sports that I know he would be good at. And many of his friends do, but he won't even try them.
What do I do?
Yeah.
Play board games. Because that's competition. So expose your kid to safer, more intimate forms of competition, which might make it more intense for him because he's competing with mom and dad or whatever. But expose him to a competition in places that are not those sports, so that he can get more comfortable with it, and then join the sports. And maybe you're also doing sports drills and stuff, like camps that are after school that are more skill-based and avoiding the competition if that's possible. You might do that too, so when and if they join that sport, they still have the skill base. That's one choice. Another choice is, what are you hoping to get out of the sport, and can you get it somewhere else? Does the kid have to play baseball? Could they do a different activity? Can they do gymnastics? Can they do basketball? Can they do martial arts? Can they play chess? Can they go to CrossFit? Are there other ways to solve the problem? Like, you have to wonder, what are you trying to get out of the sport? Is it just, I played football and my kid's going to play football? Because if that's the answer, that's not a good enough answer. But if it's, I want my kid to learn resilience and I want my kid to have a physical outlet, there's other ways to navigate that.
Now, that makes a lot of sense, because a lot of ADHD kids don't do well with team sports. So, and I think the ideas that you've just generated, martial arts, whatever, make a huge amount of sense. Yeah, you wonder why this parent feels her child needs to do team sports. But
and team sports are important because teamwork is important. Mm-hmm. You got to learn how to work in a team. But there's other things that do that too, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe your kid could be in the play. That's a team effort. Maybe your kid can join a Lego First Club. That's also team-based. There's other programs that are team-based that help us learn cooperation skills that are not specifically sports.
Okay. That makes sense. It's part sort of compassion and move on, as you've said repeatedly, which is a helpful mantra. Jackie says she has a middle schooler who has both dyslexia and ADHD. He's a great kid, curious, he loves learning, but he gets completely overwhelmed when any task seems hard or challenging. And when that happens, he just avoids the task or starts yelling or crying and saying how he hates school, and I don't know how to help him. And sometimes I end up getting frustrated and go head to head with him after being patient for only so long. Please give me some advice.
And not knowing what she's done, but strategies that I've seen work in the past. Sometimes giving a kid a heads up, like, hey, don't forget, after dinner, we're working on that essay that has been fairly challenging for you, but know that it's coming. So I want you to kind of prepare yourself. And also, we're only going to work on it for 20 minutes. Like, this is that define done scenario. That define done strategy is going to help a lot with this kid, because the overwhelm of having to write an essay or having to read a book or whatever is shutting him down. So letting him know when he's done will be useful. Also, support him as you can. So with my kids, I got a lot of pushback on vocabulary words. They just didn't want to write them. So one of the things I did was I scaffolded them until they were writing the vocab words on their own. It started with me writing the definitions for them and then giving them the index cards. They had to figure out what word matched what definition, because I still want them to learn stuff. And then they wrote the word in, right? Always I wrote first, they wrote second, because then they had to match and get some studying in, even if it was only for a split second. And then as time went by, now I'm like, you got 10 words, I'll do 5. And then it's eventually, I'm going to do 2, but you can pick which 2. And they always pick the longest definitions. And then it became, I'll do 2, but you only get 1 long one. And then I'm not doing it anymore. So inside of maybe a month and a half, 2 months, they went from having huge issues in pitching a fit before writing vocabulary words to writing them on their own, because I made the process more gentle to get into it. I reduced the barrier to entry. And that kind of an approach might be useful especially for a kid with dyslexia. Just reduce how much effort they have to put in to the task so it's comfortable and it feels safe, and then slowly increase the effort they have to put in while maintaining it feeling safe still. And then eventually they're doing it on their own.
That's great. Yeah. Here's a question. I think we've already addressed this, but maybe we should confront it head on. And that is, should I tell my child he has ADHD? I'm afraid he'll use it as a crutch, or that he'll think badly about himself.
Here's the deal. If you know your kid has ADHD and you don't tell them, eventually they're going to find out or realize that they have ADHD and you didn't tell them. And that's going to blow up in your face. So some of this depends on age. You can get away with not telling your kid in elementary school specifically what's up. But once they get to middle school, you're risking some damage to that parent-child relationship if they're like, why didn't you tell me? So if they're in middle school, tell them. If they especially if they're in middle school and they just got a diagnosis, tell them. If they're in elementary school, like, they're not necessarily going to understand it anyway. If they're not ready to cognitively get it, then you don't necessarily have to tell them. Tell them when they're going to be mature enough to handle it. But the trick with worrying about them using it as a crutch or an excuse, first off, it is an excuse, and they do need a crutch. Like, if your kid had a broken leg, you wouldn't be like, well, I'm worried about them using it as a crutch and as an excuse for why they can't run a marathon. Like, they have a broken leg. And in that case, it's fine. But with ADHD, often we're like, well, I don't know. So one, it's a disability. ADHD is life on hard mode. They have to know that they're going to live life on hard mode, and they have to figure out what strategies work for them. And if we don't provide them with that information, they're not going to learn those strategies as quick as they might. And also, yes, sometimes they're going to use it as a crutch, and that's okay. That's part of maturity. Your kid has a cold. They're going to use the cold as a crutch. They're going to use a cold as an excuse. That's part of growing up. So we don't want them to do it forever. We don't want them to do it all the time. But if it happens sometimes and it's a way for them to manage some stress and anxiety or avoid some guilt and shame, and it's not the end of the world if they do it, it's maybe you let them every now and then. But by and large, most of the time, we don't want to let them use it as a crutch. We don't want to let them use it as an excuse. There's a fine line between, it's not even, there's a line, it's not that fine. But there's a difference between permission and like enabling. We don't want to enable our kid. We don't want to let the kid enable themselves, but we do want to let them have permission to have a disorder. It's okay.
Right. Okay. That's great. Let me just find this. This is a really good question here. It is, about talking to teachers. I'm not sure how to effectively talk to my teachers about this, i.e., it's okay for him not to do very well in a particular subject, even though he does very well in others. And they seem to have very high expectations of him in all cases. How can I help teachers relax and not build bricks for my child?
You can point them to Attitude. You can point them to my podcast. You can point them to resources about ADHD so they can learn a little bit more about it and get more of a firsthand perspective on it from people who are navigating it. That's one way. And also you can talk to them about how your kid has a limited amount of resources and you're trying to teach your kid how to devote those resources to the most effective places. If your kid loves to write and is an amazing writer and they're struggling in math and kind of getting a C and that's just where it is, they can really push forth with math and try to get an A, but then their English grade is going to drop because they can't do both. And if they're going to get more of a benefit from English than they are from math, then it's okay for them to focus more effort into English, and vice versa. If they're going to get more out of math than they're going to get out of English, it's okay for them to focus more on math. And so it's really about the bigger lesson of choosing your battles and managing your energy and resources than it is about how well you're doing in a specific subject. And that larger view, even though the teacher might feel a little offended by it, you kind of have to present that information in a way that's not personal and recognize that the teacher is taking it personally, even if you don't mean it that way, and have a backup plan for how to explain it. But that larger view might help the teacher understand it better. It's not about the teacher, it's about the kid. And if teachers are having trouble understanding that, it's because they're thinking it's about them and their subject and not about the kid.
Right. So I'm afraid we're out of time. This has been incredibly helpful, Brendan. I mean, it's been a great presentation. And I urge everyone to check out Brendan's podcast. Can you give the name of that again, Brendan?
ADHD Essentials, and Essentials is ESSENTIALS.
iTunes, Stitcher, where is it found?
iTunes, Stitcher, should be on all of them. And if they go to my website, they can find it there too, which is just ADHDessentials.com.
Super. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Don't miss Brendan. You can tell that he has great practical and inspiring advice. For those of you who would like a certificate of attendance, please stay on. Do not log off. You will see a survey come up to briefly test your accuracy, sort of to prove that you listened to the webinar, I guess. And stay on through the end of the webinar when we close it out. And after having taken the quiz, you will receive an email with the certificate in the mail. If not, just email us at customerservice@attitudemag.com. For those of you who are not taking the quiz, let me tell you about our upcoming webinars. Next Tuesday, Teaching Executive Functions to Children with ADHD, of course, for teachers as well as parents. But that might be something of interest to all of you who are concerned about how to help your teachers understand your children. I think it will be a great topic. And then next Thursday, August 29, how to reset the family schedule now that the school year's already begun or about to begun and create a sort of calmer, easier morning routine with Carolyn McGuire, who's a terrific parenting expert. So I hope you'll be back and listen to Attitude webinars. As you know, we have a large library of webinars that you can listen to on replay on our website or in podcast version on iTunes, on Stitcher, and on the Attitude website under podcasts. So thanks, everybody. For those of you who are taking the survey, it is still going on. And I think we're on question 3. So take the survey and submit the results. And for everybody else, thank you, and come back soon.
For more Attitude podcast and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.